Days of our lives, J.J. Devereaux, frozen his paralysis, may have cost Shawn Brady everything. J.J. Devereaux didn't pull the trigger. That's the part nobody is saying out loud. That's the part that makes this whole thing so much more devastating than any friendly fire theory could ever be. Because here's the truth. The ugly, uncomfortable truth that the Days of Our Lives writers have been quietly building toward for months. J.J. Devereaux stood there, gun in hand, danger right in front of him, his partner's life on the line, and he froze. He couldn't shoot. The trauma locked him in place like a statue. And in that split second of paralysis, Shawn Brady took a bullet that JJ could have prevented. And I genuinely believe that this moment is the one that finally ends JJ's career in law enforcement for good. Not a firing, not a scandal, not an accident of his own making. Just a man who finally has to look himself in the mirror and admit what Theo Carver's shooting stole from him years ago, the ability to act when it matters most. Today we're talking about why JJ freezing is not a character flaw, it's the inevitable conclusion of a trauma story. This show has been telling for years, and why walking away from the badge might be the most heroic thing JJ Devereaux ever does. Let's get into it. The setup, everything on the line. One man can't move. Here's the scene as the spoilers lay it out. Shawn Brady, Brandon Beamer, criminally underrated, I will die on this hill, is heading into a direct confrontation with Klaus, played by Basil Alzaro. And Klaus is not just some random villain of the week. This man is carrying information that could detonate Vivian Alamain's entire operation, her involvement in the Demera, kidnappings, the strings she's been pulling from the shadows, all of it. If Klaus talks, Vivian, the magnificent, diabolical Louise Sorel is finished. So the stakes going into this operation are astronomical. Lives on the line, careers on the line, Salem's entire power structure potentially on the line. And J.J. Devereaux is supposed to be Shawn's backup. Supposed to be, because when the moment of crisis arrives, when the gun comes out and Shawn is directly in danger, J.J. doesn't move. He can't move. His body and his mind betray him at the exact worst possible second. And Shawn Brady pays the price for it. That is the story, not a stray bullet, not an accident of aim. A man who simply could not bring himself to fire, and what that silence cost the people around him. You cannot separate this from Theo Carver, ever. Let me take you back. Because none of what happens to JJ in that confrontation makes any sense unless you understand the full weight of what he's been carrying since the night he shot Theo Carver. Tyler Joseph Andrews Theo Young. Innocent. Caught in a situation that was never his fault, was hit by JJ's bullet during what JJ believed was a genuine threat. Response. A catastrophic, irreversible mistake made in a fraction of a second. Theo survived, but JJ, a part of JJ, died on that street. Here's the detail that I don't think gets enough attention. JJ didn't just feel guilty after the Theo shooting. He nearly didn't survive it himself. The psychological aftermath pushed him to the absolute edge. We're talking about a man who looked at what his hands had done and genuinely questioned whether he deserved to keep living. That is not garden variety guilt. That is a man whose relationship with firearms, with his own judgment, with the very act of pointing a weapon at another human being, was fundamentally, perhaps permanently, destroyed. He left Salem, he went to South Africa, and critically, he removed himself entirely from any situation where he might be forced to draw a gun. That was not accidental. That was survival. JJ's mind was protecting him the only way it knew how. Keep him away from the trigger. And then he came back and took the job again. Bạn có tin được không? The same job. the same gun, the same impossible expectation that his body would perform under pressure when his soul was still bleeding from the last time, the freeze response, why JJ couldn't pull that trigger. I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in soap opera analysis. And that's the actual psychology of what happens to a trauma survivor in a high-stress threat situation. Most people know fight or flight. Fewer people talk about the third response, freeze. When a person with unresolved trauma, particularly trauma directly connected to a specific action, like firing a weapon, is placed back into a situation that mirrors their original traumatic event, the brain doesn't always choose fight or flight. Sometimes it just stops. The neural pathways associated with that action become so loaded with horror and consequence that the mind refuses to send the signal. The body locks up, time moves, but the person inside doesn't. That is what happened to JJ Devereaux. He wasn't a coward. He wasn't indifferent to Shawn's safety. He was standing there, every cell in his body screaming at him to act. And the ghost of Theo Carver was screaming louder. What if he misses? What if he hits the wrong person again? What if his hands shake at the wrong moment and someone else ends up on the ground because of him? These are not rational calculations. In that moment, they're terror responses. Pure, overwhelming, paralyzing terror. And Shawn gets shot while JJ is fighting that battle inside his own head. The spoilers confirm it. Shawn ends up questioning JJ afterward. That detail alone tells you everything. Shawn knows JJ didn't move fast enough. Shawn knows something went wrong that had nothing to do with the bad guys and everything to do with the man who was supposed to have his back. Theo's warning was never really about the past. Here's what I keep coming back to. When Theo returned to Salem and found out JJ had rejoined the Force, the argument that followed was volcanic, raw, personal, uncomfortable to watch in the best possible way. And everyone treated it like Theo was relitigating old wounds, like he was being unfair, like he needed to let JJ move forward. But Theo wasn't talking about the past. He was talking about this moment, the one we're discussing right now. Theo looked at JJ, really looked at him, and saw a man whose hands would freeze at the worst possible time. He saw it before JJ saw it himself, before Shawn saw it, before the Salem PD saw it. Theo was right, and that reconciliation they eventually reached, beautiful and necessary as it was for their personal relationship, didn't change the fundamental truth. Theo had identified JJ was not ready to be back on that street. The peace they made was emotional. The problem was neurological. JJ freezing and failing to protect Shawn is Theo's worst fear made real. And I think when JJ processes that, when the dust settles and he has to sit with what his paralysis cost Shawn, that realization is going to be the thing that finally breaks through the denial he's been living in. Shawn questioning JJ, the most painful scene coming. The spoilers say Shawn questions JJ after the shooting. Let's sit with that for a second. Think about what that conversation looks like. Shawn Brady, a man who defended JJ, believed in him, stood by his decision to return to the Force when others had doubts, lying there. Wounded, looking at his partner and needing to understand why JJ didn't act. And what does JJ say? Because the truth, I froze. Shawn, the gun was in my hand and I couldn't fire it. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry is the kind of confession that destroys a partnership. Not because Shawn is cruel. Shawn is not a cruel person. But because there's simply no version of that conversation where things go back to normal afterward. How does Shawn trust JJ to have his back after this? How does JJ trust himself? The partnership as it existed before this incident is over. And I think JJ knows that. I think the moment Shawn goes down, JJ knows his time on the Force is over too. That is not a firing. That is a man making a choice finally. Painfully. Honestly, that he should have made before any of this happened. The badge was never going to fix what was broken inside JJ. He needed something else entirely. And it took Shawn getting shot for him to finally accept that. The exit from the Force, not a failure. Reckoning, I want to push back against what I suspect will be a lot of the fandom's reaction to JJ leaving the Salem. PD, after this. Because I already know what some people are going to say, that JJ is giving up, that he's letting the trauma win, that a real cop would push through, and I think that perspective is completely wrong. JJ Devereaux walking away from law enforcement after this incident is not a defeat. It is the first genuinely healthy decision this character has made in years. It is JJ finally being honest with himself, with the institution, with everyone who's been watching him perform readiness while falling apart inside. The Salem PD should never have let him back on active duty with a weapon while his PTSD was unresolved. That's not JJ's failure alone, that's a systemic failure. But JJ enabling that failure by insisting he was fine. By taking the job because he wanted to be ready even when he wasn't, that ends here. Shawn's shooting is horrific. But if it's the thing that finally gives JJ permission to stop performing strength, he doesn't have to lay down a badge that was never going to make him whole, then something meaningful emerges from the wreckage. Casey Moss has poured so much into this character over the years. JJ deserves a story that lets him heal. Actually heal. Not the performed recovery we've been watching, but the real quiet, difficult work of a man learning to live with what he's done and what he couldn't do. That story begins the moment JJ walks out of the Salem PD for the last time. Vivian wins again. Of course she does. And through all of this, through JJ's paralysis, Shawn's injury, the confrontation falling apart, guess whose secrets stay buried? Vivian Alamain's. Klaus doesn't get taken in. Owen Kent disappears in the chaos. The information about the Demera kidnapping stays locked away, and Louise Sorel's magnificent villain glides through another crisis completely untouched. The darkest irony of this entire storyline is that Vivian didn't need a plan for this particular outcome. She didn't need to pay anyone off or manipulate anyone into position. JJ's unresolved trauma did the work for her. The system that was supposed to stop Vivian sent a traumatized man into the field and called it justice, and